Well, hello all. This is the 10th video on electricity. It is day 21 of the lockdown of the coronavirus, or as I like to call it, the Stephen virus, because corona and Stephen both mean crown, the crown virus. So it's day 21 of the corona or Stephen virus. We're out of lockdown. We can all not have to self-isolate. We don't have to social distance anymore. Oh, wait, didn't they extend that lockdown from 21 days till the beginning of, or the end of April, beginning of May? I think they did, yeah. And I was just hearing a Stellenbosch professor, Jonathan Janssen, saying that we must just say the school year is gone, pass everybody, just maybe we'll have the matriculants a special something or other for them. You know, frankly, the Stephen virus is not going to be solved by the end of April, beginning of May. And we've got people that are starting to get a little bit hungry, especially in the poorer areas. So I think we have to really examine our priorities. Our priorities are to get food to all those poor people. Opening schools and letting the Pandora's box pandemic just go boom, mushroom. I don't think that's going to be great unless we're going for herd immunity. And how did that work for you, Boris? You were an advocate. That's the first time I heard of herd immunity recently. And he said it was touch and go. So, herd immunity is great. As long as you're not one of those biting the dust, if you know what I mean. But let's just suppose in this video that we'll just have a look at the type of questions that grade 10s, 11s, and particularly these are from the matric past papers. Just have a look at what those questions have in common. And maybe this is a time for reflection and for modifying what we learn. Maybe we can just do stuff like electricity that's fun and useful. How about that? We're not constrained by the CAP syllabus. But just have a look at these questions. Well, let's have a look. Here, November 2019. Look at the circuit they give us. All it's got is our usual voltmeter, ammeter, one resistance, and an internal resistance and a switch. It's not a particularly useful circuit. Let's have a look at the next paper, November 2018. Look at this circuit. Again, it's got internal resistance, it's got EMF, there we see, the moment we see a battery like that, it means we've got an internal resistance. There's our traditional voltmeter measuring both EMF and terminal potential difference. There's an ammeter, there's two resistors, but this is not a useful circuit either. This is November 2017. This circuit has got, again, do you see the dash box around it, meaning we've got a EMF, internal resistance. We don't have our voltmeter measuring terminal potential difference. There's a switch. There is a resistor, and we've got a few cute little questions around what's happening here. Again, it's not a particularly useful circuit. Its only use is in testing our knowledge of electricity. This was, let's see, 2016. Here's the circuit. You see the dashed box again, EMF, 12 volts, two resistors in parallel with one resistor in series, a switch, a couple of points. We're going to measure our voltage across C and D, and then a few questions. None of those circuits in the last 4 years are circuits that do anything. They are only useful in testing our basic knowledge of Ohm's law and of the formula E equals IR plus IR. So circuits with just resistance are basically fairly useless. The only thing that a resistance can produce is heat. And we don't use little resistors to produce heat. We use them for many other purposes. But if we're going to talk resistances, let me show you a slightly more interesting resistor. This is a resistor that has basically got three wires, but two resistances. And it's a variable resistor. So as we turn this, so the resistance varies. It gets greater or less between each set of wires. So I'm going to be talking about that for the rest of this video.
Have a look at this component here. Do you see it's got 1, 2, 3 wires? Now notice we've got our multimeter on 20 kilo ohms. It's at approximately 8 o'clock if this was an analog watch. And watch what happens as I turn this little dial here. Watch what happens to the resistance. It's now 7 kilo ohms, 7.8 kilo ohms. I'm turning it anti-clockwise. Notice that the resistance is getting smaller until I get it right to naught. So now this dial, you can see by that little flat thing there, is right down to naught. Now I'm going to turn it clockwise. Turning. Watch, we're about on 1 kilo ohm. 1000 ohms. Keep turning. 6.3 kilo ohms, turning it all the way, and this goes up to 11, and you'll see that crack has changed. So this is a variable resistor between those two wires, but as the resistance is increasing here, it's decreasing there, and as it decreases here, it increases here. So we actually have a sweeper wire, and here could be the 1 voltage, here could be your 0 volts, and we can get any volts we like by changing the resistance between these 3 wires. And that is by turning the sweeper. We can change the resistance, but we can also change the voltage because we have a potential divider. Let's show it to you on a circuit on a diagram. Let's suppose we have a battery, and this is 5 volts, 0 volts here. And we then have our variable resistor. Now, as this moves up closer to here, this will be reading closer to 5 volts. And as this moves down the resistance, just imagine that this sweeper, this middle wire, was moving closer to the 0 volts or closer to the 5 volts. So just imagine that this middle wire can sweep up or down, and so that it can tap off a voltage closer to the 5 or closer to the 0 volts. Remember, the voltage only drops across this one resistor. If it's halfway between, it's 2.5 volts. If it's at the top, it's 5 volts. If it's at the bottom, it's 0 volts. And anyway, we can move this up and down by simply the same thing as turning our sweeper. So by turning this, it's the same as moving this up or down. And so we can get a variable voltage on our middle wire of our potentiometer. Now, this is the same circuit we used in one of our previous videos to measure the resistance of, or the conductivity of, a solution. We dipped these 2 wires into the solution, and depending on the sound it made, so we could determine what was the resistance of the solution or its conductivity. Now, what we're doing is using this as a variable resistor, this potentiometer or rheostat variable resistor, but we're only using 2 wires. So in this case, when you only use 2 wires, it's called a variable resistor or a rheostat. And by turning this, we are changing the voltage. Well, we're changing the resistance. And as we change the resistance, this 555 circuit will change its frequency. So you can see one use for this little component in a circuit like this. Now have a look in this circuit. I can change the resistance over here. I'm using this now as a potentiometer. And by tapping off somewhere along that resistance, I'm going to get a variable voltage that goes to this LED. And as the voltage changes, watch what happens to the brightness of the LED. So as I sweep my sweeper between the 5 and the 0, the voltage is varying on this middle wire. The voltage is varying between 0 as it is now and 5 volts. There would be halfway between. Now finally, to show you that this potentiometer can create different voltages, have a look at the voltage here, the brightness there. We've now connected our voltmeter from the one side, the negative side, to the sweeper, and there's the positive side. And I put a piece of white plastic in. So we can see how the voltage changes, the brightness changes as our potentiometer changes. See how the voltage is climbing, 5.6. Look at the brightness of our LED. I've turned it completely clockwise. Now I'm going to start turning it anti-clockwise. Watch how the voltage is falling. And when the voltage gets to about just below 2, there's 1.78. Our LED is just about off. We can turn it completely off at a voltage of about 1.69 or 1.7. And then we can turn the voltage all the way down to virtually 0. So here's our potentiometer. Here's the sweeper or middle arm. And by just turning it, we can get a varying voltage. It's almost like the light dimmer switch that you sometimes see in certain lounges, where you can turn up the brightness of the bulb. So here it's acting as a potentiometer.